The morning light filtered through the dust-covered windows of Fletcher's general store as Clara Mae Thompson arranged the inventory with mathematical precision. Each tin of beans stood exactly 2 inches apart, every bolt of fabric measured to the quarter yard, and the penny candy jars contained precisely counted pieces. Her fingers moved with practiced efficiency, but her lips moved even faster, whispering numbers that danced through her mind like a constant melody. 47 buttons on the blue dress, 63 on the green, total of 110 decorative elements per display rack, she murmured, adjusting a sleeve so it hung at a perfect angle. The store owner, Robert Fletcher, watched from behind his counter with a mixture of fascination and bewilderment. In the 3 days since Clara had arrived in Millbrook, Colorado, she had transformed his chaotic shop into a marvel of organization that drew curious glances from every customer. Clara paused in her counting to smooth her travel-worn brown dress, the same one she had worn on the train from Baltimore. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Her fingers automatically found the worn leather journal tucked into her pocket, its pages filled with calculations that chronicled every detail of her journey west. 743 miles by rail, 12 stops, 216 passengers she had observed, and exactly $8.67 remaining from her life savings. The numbers had always been her refuge ever since childhood in her father's small accounting office, where she had learned that figures never lied, never betrayed, and never broke promises the way people did. When her father died and left her with nothing but debts and a reputation for being peculiar, the numbers had whispered of new possibilities, of a fresh start in the territories where practical skills mattered more than social conventions. William Harrison's advertisement in the Baltimore Sun had seemed like an answer to her silent prayers. Seeking practical wife for Colorado ranch. Must be hardworking, decent, and capable of managing household accounts. Clara had crafted her response with careful precision, detailing her bookkeeping experience and domestic skills while artfully avoiding mention of her more unusual habits. She had counted the letters in her reply 17 times before sealing it. Now, as she stood in Fletcher's store arranging merchandise with obsessive care, Clara felt the familiar flutter of nervous anticipation in her chest. Today was the day. William Harrison would arrive to meet his mail-order bride. She had calculated every possible outcome, but mathematics could not account for the unpredictable nature of human hearts. "Miss Thompson," Fletcher called from the counter, "you've got that place looking finer than a Denver department store. Harrison's going to be mighty impressed with his bride." Clara's hands stilled on a display of ribbons she had been organizing by color wavelength. "Do you think he'll mind about my methods?" Fletcher chuckled, shaking his head. "Any man fool enough to mind efficiency ain't worth your time. Why, yesterday alone you spotted 3 counting errors in my inventory that would have cost me real money." The bell above the store door chimed with a cheerful note that Clara immediately cataloged as B-flat. A woman entered, her expensive dress marking her as one of Millbrook's more prosperous residents. Mrs. Dorothy Hayes, owner of the town's finest boarding house, surveyed the reorganized store with obvious approval. "Robert, your store has never looked better," she declared, her sharp eyes taking in every perfectly aligned product. "I heard our new arrival has quite the head for business." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks as the 2 adults discussed her, as if she were another piece of merchandise to be evaluated. She resumed her counting, finding comfort in the predictable rhythm of numbers. 27 spools of thread, arranged by thickness from finest to heaviest, optimal for customer selection efficiency, she whispered. Mrs. Hayes approached with measured steps that Clara automatically counted 7 strides from door to display case. "Miss Thompson, I presume?" "I'm Dorothy Hayes. I understand you're meeting Mr. Harrison today." "Yes, ma'am." At precisely 2 o'clock at the train depot, according to his telegram. Clara pulled out her pocket watch, a practical timepiece that had belonged to her father. 1 hour and 43 minutes from now. Punctuality is a virtue, Mrs. Hayes observed, though her tone suggested she had noticed Clara's precise timing methods. Tell me, dear, what drew you to our little town? Clara considered her answer carefully, her fingers absently straightening the already perfect display of buttons. Mr. Harrison's advertisement mentioned the need for someone capable with household accounts. I have experience with bookkeeping and inventory management. I see. Mrs. Hayes picked up a tin of baking powder, examining it as if searching for flaws. And you find such work fulfilling? Numbers make sense, Clara replied. Simply. They follow rules. They don't change their minds or break promises. Something in Clara's tone must have conveyed more than she intended, because Mrs. Hayes set down the tin with unusual gentleness. Well, dear, I hope you find Millbrook too. Your liking. It's a growing town with opportunities for those willing to work hard. After Mrs. Hayes departed, Clara returned to her organizing with renewed intensity. She counted bolts of fabric, measured distances between displays, and calculated the most efficient traffic patterns for customer movement through the store. The familiar rhythm of numbers soothed her growing anxiety about the approaching meeting. Fletcher watched her work with genuine admiration. You know, Miss Thompson, in all my years running this place, I've never seen anyone with such an eye for organization. You've got a real gift. It's not a gift, Clara said quietly, her hands never pausing in their methodical arrangement. It's necessity. When you can't trust people to keep their word, you learn to trust things that stay constant. The store owner's expression grew thoughtful. Sounds like you've had some hard lessons, young lady. Clara didn't respond, but her fingers tightened around a bolt of blue calico as memories threatened to intrude on her careful composure. The numbers had been her salvation when her father's business partner disappeared with their clients' money, leaving her to face angry creditors alone. They had been her comfort when suitors fled after witnessing her compulsive counting habits. They would be her anchor now in this new place where she hoped to build a life free from judgment and disappointment. As the morning progressed, customers began filtering into the store, drawn by curiosity about the reorganized displays and the young woman responsible for them. Clara noticed that people moved through the space more efficiently now, finding what they needed without the frustrated searching that had characterized their previous visits. She tallied each transaction, noting patterns in purchasing behavior and optimal product placement. A gruff-looking miner entered, his clothes still dusty, from the silver claims outside town. He paused at the reorganized tool display, running weathered fingers over the precisely arranged implements. Well, I'll be, he muttered. Actually can find what I need without digging through a pile of junk. Clara felt a small surge of satisfaction as she watched him quickly locate a new pickaxe handle. Her organizational system was working exactly as she had calculated it would. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine William Harrison's approval when he saw how efficiently she could manage practical matters. The miner approached the counter with his purchase, glancing curiously at Clara as Fletcher tallied his bill. You the young lady who straightened this place out? Yes, sir, Clara replied, automatically counting the coins he placed on the counter. Good work, he said gruffly. Takes a sharp mind to see patterns the way you do. After he left, Clara returned to her tasks with renewed confidence. Perhaps her peculiarities would be seen as assets in this frontier town where practical skills trumped social conventions. She imagined herself managing William Harrison's ranch accounts, bringing order to what was surely a chaotic system of records and inventories. The clock above Fletcher's counter chimed 12 times, and Clara felt her stomach tighten with nervous energy. 2 hours until her meeting with the man who might become her husband. She pulled out her journal and reviewed the careful notes she had made about their correspondence, checking her calculations about travel expenses and remaining funds. The afternoon sun blazed overhead as Clara Mae Thompson, walked the precisely measured distance from Fletcher's general store to the Millbrook train depot. 427 steps she counted silently, her worn leather boots clicking against the dusty wooden sidewalks in a rhythm that matched her accelerated heartbeat. Her best dress, a modest gray wool that she had carefully mended and pressed that morning, felt constricting in the Colorado heat, but she had calculated that proper presentation would be crucial for this first meeting. In her reticule, she carried her father's old pocket watch, exactly $8.67 in carefully counted coins, and the leather journal containing 3 months of correspondence with William Harrison. She had memorized every letter, analyzed his handwriting for personality traits, and calculated the statistical probability of their compatibility based on shared interests and practical considerations. The mathematics had been promising, though Clara had learned long ago that human nature often defied logical prediction. The depot buzzed with the controlled chaos of afternoon activity. A freight train had arrived from Denver, bringing supplies and mail to the growing mining town. Clara positioned herself at the exact spot Harrison had specified in his telegram, near the large clock that dominated the station wall. She pulled out her pocket watch and compared it to the station timekeeper, noting a discrepancy of 43 seconds that she automatically recorded in her mental ledger. Her eyes scanned the crowd methodically, cataloging details with practiced efficiency. 26 passengers had disembarked from the freight train, 14 men and 12 women, ranging in age from approximately 16 to 68 years. Based on Harrison's description of himself as a successful rancher in his 30s with brown hair and a commanding presence, she should be able to identify him without difficulty. A tall man in a pristine black suit and polished boots approached the depot platform with confident strides. His hat sat at a precise angle, his mustache was trimmed to military specifications, and his bearing suggested someone accustomed to giving orders and having them followed without question. Clara's pulse quickened as she recognized the description from Harrison's letters, though something in his expression made her instinctively begin counting her breathing to calm her nerves. William Harrison surveyed the platform with calculating eyes, clearly searching for someone who matched Clara's description. When his gaze fell upon her, she saw a flicker of recognition followed by something that might have been satisfaction. He approached with purposeful steps, his boots clicking against the wooden platform in a staccato rhythm that Clara automatically counted. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Miss Clara Thompson, I presume," he said, removing his hat with practiced courtesy. His voice carried the authority of a man accustomed to command, but Clara noticed that his eyes remained coldly evaluative as they took in her appearance. "Yes, Mr. Harrison, it's a pleasure to finally meet you in person." Clara offered a careful smile, her hands clasped tightly around her reticle to keep them from trembling. The journey from Baltimore was quite efficient. 743 miles in exactly 4 days and 6 hours. Harrison's eyebrows rose slightly at her precise accounting of the travel time. "Indeed. I trust the accommodations were adequate?" "Perfectly satisfactory. I maintained detailed records of all expenses, which came to exactly $31.33, precisely as I had calculated." Clara reached for her journal, eager to demonstrate her careful financial management. "I can show you the itemized accounting if you'd like to review." "That won't be necessary," Harrison interrupted, his tone sharpening with what Clara suddenly recognized as impatience rather than interest. "Tell me, Miss Thompson, do you always speak in such specific terms?" Clara felt a familiar chill of apprehension, the same sensation she had experienced countless times when her precise nature had unsettled potential suitors back east. "I find accuracy important in all matters, Mr. Harrison. In your letters, you mentioned the need for someone capable of managing household accounts and ranch records." "Indeed I did." Harrison's eyes narrowed as he observed Clara's unconscious habit of organizing the contents of her reticule while they spoke. However, I had assumed such skills would be employed in a normal womanly fashion, not with this obsessive attention to minutiae. The word obsessive struck Clara like a physical blow, though she managed to maintain her composure through years of practice. Around them, the depot continued its bustling activity, but she felt suddenly isolated, as if a wall of silence had descended between her and the rest of the world. I assure you, Mr. Harrison, my attention to detail would be an asset in managing your ranch affairs. I've already identified several inefficiencies in the town's commercial establishments that could easily be corrected with proper systematic approaches. Harrison's expression grew increasingly cold as Clara spoke. She recognized the look now, the same mixture of distaste and suspicion that had driven away every other man who had attempted to court her. Her fingers automatically began counting the buttons on his vest as anxiety flooded through her system. "Miss Thompson," Harrison said, his voice taking on the tone one might use to address a misbehaving child, "I requested a practical wife, not a woman afflicted with unnatural compulsions. Your constant counting and measuring suggest a mind unsuited to normal domestic responsibilities." Clara's mouth opened in protest, but Harrison continued relentlessly. "Furthermore, I have made inquiries about your background since our correspondence began. It seems your father's business failed due to irregularities in his accounting practices. I cannot risk associating my family name with such questionable financial history." The depot platform seemed to tilt beneath Clara's feet as the implications of Harrison's words sank in. Not only was he rejecting her for her mathematical inclinations, but he was also condemning her based on circumstances entirely beyond her control. Her father's business partner had embezzled funds, leaving her family to face the consequences of another man's crimes. "Mr. Harrison, if you would allow me to explain the circumstances surrounding my father's business." "There is nothing to explain," Harrison said curtly, replacing his hat with decisive finality. "I require a wife who can function normally in society, not someone whose peculiar habits would embarrass my family and business associates. This arrangement is terminated." Clara watched in stunned silence as Harrison turned and walked away. Without another word, his polished boots clicking against the platform in a rhythm she found herself counting despite her emotional turmoil. 27 steps to the depot entrance, where he disappeared into the crowd without looking back. The sounds of the train station rushed back into Clara's awareness like a dam bursting. Conversations resumed their normal volume, freight handlers continued their work, and life proceeded as if her world had not just collapsed around her. She stood motionless near the station clock, clutching her reticule with white-knuckled intensity while trying to process what had just occurred. Passengers and townspeople began to notice the young woman standing alone, some pointing discreetly while others whispered behind gloved hands. Clara realized that Harrison's rejection had been witnessed by half the town, adding public humiliation to her private devastation. Her carefully planned future had evaporated in the space of a 5-minute conversation, leaving her stranded 1,500 miles from home with less than $9 to her name. With mechanical precision born of years of habit, Clara walked to a wooden bench at the edge of the platform and sat down to assess her situation mathematically. $8.67 remaining from her travel funds. No return ticket to Baltimore. No employment prospects in a town where she was now known as the woman too peculiar for William Harrison to marry. The numbers painted a stark picture of limited options and dwindling resources. She pulled out her journal and began calculating survival scenarios with the same methodical approach she applied to all problems. Boarding house rates, meal costs, potential employment opportunities, and the minimum funds required to either establish herself in Millbrook or secure passage back east. The mathematics were unforgiving in their clarity. She had perhaps 2 weeks before complete destitution. As Clara worked through her calculations, she became aware of curious stares from passing townspeople. Some regarded her with pity, others with the kind of fascinated revulsion typically reserved for carnival oddities. A group of well-dressed women clustered near the depot entrance, their voices carrying clearly across the platform. "Can you imagine?" Harrison said she counts everything obsessively, like some sort of mental affliction. Perhaps it's for the best. Such peculiarities might be inherited by children. Still, to be rejected so publicly must be terribly humiliating for the poor creature. Clara forced herself to continue writing in her journal, though the numbers blurred slightly as unwanted tears threatened to fall. She had endured similar gossip in Baltimore, but somehow it felt more devastating here in this small town where everyone would know her business within hours. A shadow fell across her journal, and Clara looked up to see a man standing nearby. Unlike Harrison's polished appearance, this stranger wore a simple brown suit that showed honest wear, and his dark hair needed trimming. His face bore the kind of weathered lines that spoke of outdoor work and genuine concern, rather than social calculation. "Pardon me, miss," he said quietly, his voice carrying a gentle warmth that contrasted sharply with Harrison's cold dismissal. "I couldn't help but notice you seem to be in some distress. Are you quite all right?" Clara studied his face carefully, searching for signs of the mocking curiosity she had grown accustomed to seeing in men's eyes. Instead, she found only sincere concern and what appeared to be genuine kindness. Still, years of disappointment had taught her caution. "I'm managing adequately, thank you," she replied, closing her journal with practiced efficiency. "Just making some calculations regarding my immediate circumstances." The man glanced toward the depot entrance where Harrison had disappeared. Then back to Clara with understanding dawning in his expression. "You wouldn't happen to be Miss Thompson, would you? The lady who was expecting to meet William Harrison today?" Clara's heart sank as she realized her humiliation was already common knowledge. "I am, though I suspect that introduction is no longer relevant." "Samuel Mitchell," the man said, removing his hat with simple courtesy. "I run the accounting office here in town. And if you'll permit me to say so, ma'am, Harrison's loss is considerable." Despite her emotional turmoil, Clara found herself automatically analyzing Samuel Mitchell's appearance and demeanor. Approximately 30 years. Old, brown hair and eyes, honest bearing, calloused hands suggesting manual labor, despite his profession as an accountant. His clothes were clean but not expensive, indicating modest but stable income. Most importantly, he showed no signs of the discomfort or amusement that her situation typically provoked in others. "That's very kind of you to say, Mr. Mitchell, though I suspect few would share that assessment." Samuel's expression grew thoughtful as he observed Clara's careful posture and the methodical way she organized her belongings. "From what I've heard about your organizational skills at Fletcher's store, I'd say you possess exactly the kind of practical abilities this town needs, Harrison's opinion notwithstanding." Clara felt a flutter of surprise that Samuel had heard about her work at the general store, and that he seemed to view her systematic approach as an asset rather than an affliction. "You're familiar with my work? Fletcher's been singing your praises all week. Says you've transformed his inventory system and improved his customer flow considerably. That takes real skill and intelligence." For the first time since Harrison's rejection, Clara felt a small spark of hope flicker in her chest. Samuel Mitchell spoke about her abilities with the kind of professional respect she had rarely encountered, especially from men who might view her mathematical inclinations as unseemly for a woman. "I do find that proper organization improves efficiency in most circumstances," Clara said carefully, unsure how much of her true nature she should reveal to the stranger. Samuel smiled, and Clara noticed that his expression reached his eyes in a way that suggested genuine warmth rather than polite tolerance. "In my line of work, I've learned to appreciate people who understand the value of precision and accuracy. Would you mind if I asked what your plans are now?" The question forced Clara to confront the stark reality of her situation. She had no plans beyond the mathematical calculations she had been working through. No clear path forward in a town where she knew no one and had no prospects for employment. "I'm still determining my options," she said honestly. "My resources are somewhat limited, and I need to calculate the most practical course of action." Samuel nodded as if her methodical approach to problem-solving made perfect sense to him. "If you'll permit a suggestion, Miss Thompson, Mrs. Hayes runs a respectable boarding house just down the street. Clean rooms, fair rates, and she's got a reputation for helping folks who find themselves in temporary difficulties." Clara automatically calculated the cost of boarding house accommodations against her remaining funds, quickly determining that such an arrangement would be financially sustainable for approximately 10 days. "That's very helpful information, Mr. Mitchell. Thank you." "Furthermore," Samuel continued, "if you're looking for employment opportunities, I might know of some possibilities. The town's growing rapidly, and there's always need for people with strong organizational and mathematical skills." The suggestion was so unexpected that Clara almost dropped her journal. In Baltimore, her accounting abilities had been viewed as an unfortunate eccentricity that made her unsuitable for marriage. The idea that they might actually be valued in a professional capacity seemed almost too good to be true. "You really think there might be opportunities for someone like me?" "I think," Samuel said with quiet conviction, "that a woman who can transform Fletcher's chaotic store into a model of efficiency in 3 days probably has skills that half the businesses in this town could benefit from." Clara felt something she had not experienced in months, a sense of possibility that extended beyond mere survival. Samuel Mitchell was offering not just practical assistance, but a glimpse of a future where her mathematical nature might be celebrated rather than merely tolerated. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, carefully choosing her words, "I should mention that my approach to organization is perhaps more systematic than most people find comfortable. Mr. Harrison described it as obsessive." Samuel's expression didn't change, though Clara thought she detected a slight tightening around his eyes that suggested anger on her behalf rather than concern about her admission. "Miss Thompson," he said firmly, "in my experience, the people who accomplish the most important work are usually the ones others consider too focused or too particular. I've never seen a successful business that didn't require exactly the kind of attention to detail you're describing." Clara stared at him in amazement, hardly daring to believe that she had encountered someone who not only understood her nature, but actually valued it. After years of being made to feel ashamed of her mathematical inclinations, Samuel's words felt like absolution. "You really mean that?" "I really do." Samuel glanced toward the boarding house at the end of the street. "What do you say we get you settled at Mrs. Hayes' place, and then perhaps you'd allow me to show you my office? I think you might find it interesting." Clara stood slowly, her legs still unsteady from the emotional upheaval of the afternoon. As she gathered her belongings with characteristic precision, she found herself counting not failures and limitations, but possibilities and opportunities. For the first time since arriving in Millbrook, the numbers seemed to be adding up in her favor. The walk to Mrs. Hayes' boarding house took exactly 215 steps along Millbrook's main thoroughfare, a distance Clara measured automatically while trying to process the unexpected kindness of Samuel Mitchell's offer. The afternoon heat shimmered off the dusty street, creating wavering mirages that distorted the facades of the buildings lining their path. Clara found herself cataloging architectural details as they walked 17 storefronts, 8 with hand-painted signs, 3 requiring obvious repair work that could be completed for an estimated cost of $47 based on local lumber prices she had observed. Samuel walked beside her with an unhurried pace that suggested he was accustomed to allowing others to set their own rhythm rather than imposing his will upon them. This small courtesy struck Clara as significant after her experience with Harrison, whose every gesture had demanded compliance and submission. When they paused at a street crossing to allow a freight wagon to pass, Samuel didn't fidget or show impatience. but simply waited with the same calm attentiveness he had shown throughout their conversation. The boarding house has been in Mrs. Hayes' family for nearly 15 years, Samuel explained as they resumed walking. Her late husband built it when the first silver strikes brought prospectors through town. She's got a keen business sense and runs a fair establishment. Clara absorbed this information while simultaneously calculating the economic implications of a 15-year-old business in a frontier town. The longevity suggested both sound management and consistent demand, indicators that boded well for the stability of any employment opportunities in Millbrook. She also noted Samuel's respectful tone when speaking of Mrs. Hayes, which indicated either genuine admiration or careful political consideration of an influential community member. The boarding house proved to be a substantial two-story structure, painted in cheerful yellow with white trim that showed recent maintenance. A wrap-around porch provided shade and seating for guests, while flower boxes beneath the windows added touches of domesticity that softened the building's practical lines. Clara automatically counted 12 windows facing the street, each with matching blue shutters that had been painted within the last 2 years based on their condition. Mrs. Hayes emerged from the front door as they approached, her timing so precise that Clara suspected she had been watching their progress from one of those well-maintained windows. The older woman wore a practical gray dress with minimal ornamentation, but her bearing suggested confidence and authority rather than austerity. Her silver hair was arranged in a style that balanced propriety with efficiency, and her sharp eyes missed nothing as they assessed Clara's appearance and demeanor. "Mr. Mitchell," she said with warm familiarity, "what brings you by this afternoon?" "Mrs. Hayes, I'd like you to meet Miss Clara Thompson. She's looking for accommodations while she gets settled in town." Mrs. Hayes' expression shifted subtly as she registered Clara's name and circumstances. News of Harrison's rejection had obviously already reached her ears, but Clara was relieved to see sympathy rather than judgment in the older woman's face. "Miss Thompson, of course. I heard you'd arrived on this morning's freight train." Mrs. Hayes stepped forward with welcoming warmth. "I understand you've had rather a trying day. Please, come inside where we can discuss arrangements properly." The interior of the boarding house reflected the same attention to detail Clara had observed outside. The entrance hall featured polished wooden floors, tasteful wallpaper in muted colors, and furniture that showed quality craftsmanship despite obvious age. A grandfather clock in the corner chimed the quarter hour with resonant tones that Clara immediately identified as precisely tuned. Everything spoke of careful maintenance and pride in ownership. Mrs. Hayes led them into a comfortable sitting room furnished with well-worn but clean upholstered chairs and a small writing desk positioned to catch the afternoon light. She gestured for Clara to take a seat while Samuel remained standing near the doorway, his hat respectfully removed. "Now then, Miss Thompson, let's discuss your needs. I have a corner room on the second floor that's quite pleasant. It includes meals and laundry service for $3 per week, payable in advance." Clara opened her reticule and began counting out coins with practiced efficiency. $3 represented more than a third of her remaining funds, but Mrs. Hayes' rate was fair based on her observations of frontier accommodation costs. As she counted, she became aware that both Mrs. Hayes and Samuel were watching her methodical approach to the transaction with interest, rather than the usual discomfort such displays typically provoked. "I can pay for 2 weeks in advance," Clara said, placing exactly $6 on the small table between them. "That should provide adequate time to secure employment and establish a more permanent arrangement." Mrs. Hayes collected the money with a businesslike nod. "Very sensible. I appreciate guests who plan ahead rather than hoping circumstances will sort themselves out." She turned to Samuel with a meaningful look. "I believe you mentioned something about employment possibilities?" "I did indeed." Samuel's response carried a note of enthusiasm that surprised Clara. Miss Thompson has demonstrated remarkable organizational abilities during her brief time in town. Fletcher can't stop praising the improvements she made to his store's inventory system. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks at the unexpected praise. I simply applied basic principles of systematic arrangement. Most inefficiencies can be corrected with proper analysis and logical reorganization. Exactly the kind of thinking we need more of in this town, Mrs. Hayes observed approvingly. Too many businesses here operate on guesswork and tradition rather than sound planning. Samuel moved closer to the conversation, his excitement becoming more apparent. Mrs. Hayes, you should see what she accomplished at Fletcher's place. Customer. Traffic flows more smoothly, inventory is perfectly organized, and she identified several counting errors that would have cost him money. That does sound impressive, Mrs. Hayes agreed, studying Clara with renewed interest. Tell me, dear, do you have formal training in bookkeeping and business management? Clara chose her words carefully, aware that her response might determine whether she found acceptance or suspicion in this new community. My father operated an accounting firm in Baltimore. I assisted with his work from childhood, learning ledger systems, inventory management, and financial analysis. After his death, I managed the dissolution of his business affairs and handled all creditor negotiations. The partial truth felt safer than revealing the full extent of her mathematical compulsions, though she sensed that both Mrs. Hayes and Samuel were perceptive enough to recognize there was more to her story. She had learned through painful experience that complete honesty about her counting habits often led to immediate rejection, while careful revelation of her practical skills sometimes earned her a chance to prove her value. Mrs. Hayes exchanged a meaningful glance with Samuel before leaning forward in her chair. Miss Thompson, I'm going to speak plainly because I believe you're the sort of person who appreciates directness. This town is growing rapidly, but most of our business owners are ranchers and miners who understand cattle and ore better than they understand proper record keeping. We've needed someone with real accounting skills for months. Clara's pulse quickened at the implication, though she forced herself to remain composed. What sort of opportunities are you referring to? Samuel answered before Mrs. Hayes could respond, his enthusiasm evident in every word. My office handles bookkeeping for several businesses, but I'm overwhelmed with work. The silver mines alone generate enough paperwork to keep 2 people busy, and that's before considering the ranching operations and retail establishments. I've been looking for a qualified partner for over a year. The word partner resonated through Clara's mind like a bell struck in a silent room. In Baltimore, her accounting skills had been viewed as an unseemly eccentricity that made her unsuitable for marriage. The possibility that those same abilities might be valued as professional assets seemed almost too extraordinary to believe. You're suggesting I might work in your accounting office? Clara asked carefully, hardly daring to hope that such an opportunity might be real. I'm suggesting you might transform it, Samuel replied with conviction, based on what you accomplished at Fletcher's store in just 3 days. I believe you could revolutionize how business records are maintained throughout this entire region. Mrs. Hayes nodded approvingly. Samuel's been struggling to keep up with demand ever since the silver strikes increased mining activity. Half the claims in the area have incomplete or inaccurate records, which causes problems when disputes arise or when investors want financial reports. Clara's mind immediately began calculating the implications of such widespread record keeping. Problems. Inaccurate mining claims could lead to legal disputes worth thousands of dollars. Poor inventory management in retail establishments resulted in lost profits and customer dissatisfaction. The potential for systematic improvement was enormous, and her pulse accelerated at the thought of applying her organizational skills to such complex challenges. What would such a partnership entail? Clara asked, though she was already mentally designing improved filing systems and calculation methods for mining operations. Samuel's response revealed that he had given considerable thought to the practical details. Shared responsibilities, shared profits, and shared decision-making authority. I handle the established client relationships, and you focus on developing new systems and expanding our services. Your name would appear on all business documents as an equal partner. The offer was so generous that Clara suspected there might be complications she had not yet discovered. In her experience, men who offered professional equality to women usually had ulterior motives or hidden agendas. She studied Samuel's face carefully, searching for signs of deception or inappropriate interest, but found only professional enthusiasm and what appeared to be genuine respect for her abilities. Mr. Mitchell, I appreciate your confidence, but you've known me for less than 2 hours. How can you be certain I possess the skills necessary for such a responsibility? Samuel's smile suggested he had anticipated her question. Because in those 2 hours, you've demonstrated more systematic thinking than most people show in 2 months. You've analyzed costs, calculated resources, and planned ahead while managing a personal crisis that would leave most people paralyzed with indecision. Mrs. Hayes added her support with characteristic directness. Furthermore, dear, Samuel's judgment about people is excellent. If he believes you can handle the work, you probably can. Clara found herself caught between disbelief and overwhelming gratitude. After years of being made to feel ashamed of her mathematical nature, she was being offered not just employment, but professional partnership based on the very qualities that had made her unmarriageable in polite society. There is something you should know before making such an offer, Clara said, her conscience demanding honesty despite her desperate need for the opportunity. My approach to organization and record keeping is quite thorough. Some people find my attention to detail excessive. Samuel's expression didn't change, though Mrs. Hayes raised an eyebrow with what might have been amusement. Miss Thompson, in accounting work, there's no such thing as excessive attention to detail. The more thorough, the better. I mean that I count and measure things compulsively, Clara continued, determined to be completely honest. I organize everything according to mathematical principles, and I keep detailed records of seemingly insignificant information that others consider unnecessary. Instead of the alarm or disapproval she expected, Samuel's face lit up with something that looked remarkably like delight. You mean you naturally think in terms of systems and patterns? That you instinctively look for ways to quantify and organize information? Clara nodded reluctantly, still braced for rejection. Yes, exactly. Miss Thompson, Samuel said with evident satisfaction. You've just described the ideal temperament for advanced accounting work. What you call compulsive, I call thorough. What others might see as excessive, I recognize as precision. Mrs. Hayes chuckled softly. My dear, you've been thinking of your greatest strength as a weakness. In this town, your systematic mind could be worth more than silver claims. The conversation that followed revealed the true scope of Millbrook's need for professional accounting services. Samuel's current client list included 3 silver mines, 2 large cattle ranches, the town's bank, 4 retail establishments, and several smaller businesses. Each operation maintained records according to their own informal systems, resulting in inconsistencies that complicated financial analysis and legal documentation. The Consolidated Mining Company alone employs over 60 men and operates 4 separate claims, Samuel explained. Their current record-keeping consists of handwritten notes in 3 different ledgers, maintained by supervisors who don't communicate with each other. When investors request financial reports, it takes weeks to compile accurate information. Clara's mind immediately began envisioning systematic solutions to such organizational chaos. Standardized forms for each type of transaction, centralized. Record keeping with duplicate entries for verification. Regular reconciliation schedules to identify discrepancies before they compound into major problems. Samuel's excitement was evident as Clara outlined potential improvements. Exactly, and that's just one client. Imagine what we could accomplish with comprehensive reforms across all our business relationships. Mrs. Hayes observed their animated discussion with obvious approval. I can see you two will work well together. When do you plan to begin this partnership? The question forced Clara to confront the practical details of her situation. She had accommodations for 2 weeks, minimal funds, and no formal agreement governing the proposed business relationship. While Samuel's offer seemed genuine, she had learned to be cautious about arrangements that seemed too good to be true. Perhaps we should start with a trial period, Clara suggested diplomatically. I could assist with some of your current projects, while we determine whether our working styles are compatible. Samuel nodded approvingly. Sensible approach. Why don't you come by my office tomorrow morning? I can show you our current systems, and you can evaluate what improvements might be possible. As they finalized arrangements for Clara's introduction to Samuel's accounting practice, she became aware of a subtle shift in the atmosphere. Mrs. Hayes had moved to the window and was peering through the curtains with an expression that suggested concern rather than casual interest in street activity. Samuel, Mrs. Hayes said quietly, you might want to have a look at this. Samuel joined her at the window, and Clara saw his jaw tighten as he observed whatever had captured Mrs. Hayes' attention. Curiosity overcoming discretion, Clara approached the window and looked out to see William Harrison standing in the street, surrounded by 3 other men whose expensive clothes and authoritative bearing marked them as people of influence in the community. Harrison was gesturing animatedly toward the boarding house while speaking in tones too low to be heard clearly, but his body language suggested anger and indignation. The men with him listened with the kind of serious attention that indicated Harrison's words carried weight in local affairs. What do you suppose they're discussing? Clara asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Mrs. Hayes' expression had grown grim. Nothing good, I'd wager. Harrison's not the type to accept rejection gracefully, even when it's his own doing. Samuel's face showed a mixture of anger and concern as he watched the group. He's talking to Banker Whitfield and 2 members of the town council. That's not a casual conversation. Clara felt her newfound optimism begin to crumble as she realized that Harrison's rejection might have consequences beyond personal humiliation. If he chose to use his influence to poison community opinion against her, her chances of establishing a successful business partnership with Samuel could be destroyed before they truly began. The men in the street concluded their discussion with the kind of firm handshakes that suggested agreements had been reached. Harrison tipped his hat to his companions and walked away with the satisfied bearing of a man who had accomplished his objectives. The others dispersed in different directions, their faces showing the serious expressions of people who had received troubling information. This could complicate things, Samuel observed grimly. Mrs. Hayes turned away from the window with determined resolution. Nonsense. Harrison may have influence, but he doesn't run this town. There are plenty of people here who value fairness and good sense over social prejudice. Clara appreciated Mrs. Hayes' supportive words, but she had learned through bitter experience that social influence often trumped fairness in community disputes. If Harrison chose to characterize her mathematical habits as mental instability or moral deficiency, many people would accept his assessment without question. Perhaps I should reconsider the partnership offer, Clara said reluctantly. If my presence in town creates difficulties for your business, absolutely not, Samuel interrupted firmly. I don't make business decisions based on William Harrison's opinions, and I won't start now. Mrs. Hayes added her support with characteristic directness. My dear, if we allowed bullies like Harrison to dictate who could live and work in this town, Millbrook would be a very different place. You have every right to build a life here, and anyone who says otherwise will have to answer to more people than they might expect. Despite their reassurances, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that Harrison's consultation with influential community members represented a significant threat to her fragile prospects in Millbrook. She had escaped from Baltimore to avoid exactly this kind of social persecution, only to find herself facing similar challenges in what was supposed to be her refuge. The remainder of the afternoon passed in a blur of practical arrangements and growing anxiety. Mrs. Hayes showed Clara to her room, a pleasant corner space with good light and simple but comfortable furnishings. Samuel departed with promises to meet her at his office the following morning, but Clara noticed that his enthusiasm seemed somewhat dampened by Harrison's ominous street conference. As evening approached, Clara sat at the small writing desk in her room and attempted to update her journal with the day's events. The mathematics of her situation had changed dramatically since morning. She now had accommodations, potential employment, and what appeared to be genuine allies in Mrs. Hayes and Samuel. However, the social calculations had become infinitely more complex with Harrison's obvious intention to sabotage her prospects. She opened her ledger and began recording the day's financial transactions with mechanical precision, finding comfort in the familiar rhythm of numbers and calculations. $6 for boarding house accommodations, leaving her with $2.67 in ready funds. Potential income from accounting partnership yet to be determined, but possibly sufficient to establish genuine financial independence. A soft knock at her door interrupted her calculations. Mrs. Hayes entered carrying a tea tray and wearing an expression that suggested she had news to share. "I thought you might appreciate some refreshment after such an eventful day," Mrs. Hayes sighed, setting the tray on Clara's desk. "I also wanted to inform you about some developments." Clara set down her pen and gave Mrs. Hayes her full attention. "What sort of developments?" "I've been speaking with some of the other business owners in town. Word of your work at Fletcher's store has spread, and several people are interested in your organizational services." Mrs. Hayes poured tea into 2 delicate china cups. "Mrs. Patterson, who runs the dress shop, wants to discuss inventory management, and Dr. Reeves needs help organizing his medical supply records." The news should have been encouraging, but Clara found herself wondering if these business owners had spoken with William Harrison since his street conference with the town's influential men. "Have they heard about my circumstances with Mr. Harrison?" Clara asked carefully. Mrs. Hayes' smile carried a hint of satisfaction. "Oh, they've heard Harrison's version of events. They've also heard Fletcher's account of your work, Samuel's assessment of your abilities, and my own observations about your character. Fortunately, not everyone in this town takes William Harrison as the final authority on all matters." Clara felt a small surge of hope at Mrs. Hayes' words, though she remained cautious about assuming too much from preliminary expressions of interest. "I appreciate their confidence, but I suspect Mr. Harrison will work to undermine any business relationships I might attempt to establish." "Undoubtedly he will," Mrs. Hayes agreed without apparent concern. "Harrison's used to having his opinions treated as commandments, and he doesn't handle contradiction well. However, he's also made enemies over the years through his arrogant behavior. Not everyone will be inclined to support him in a campaign against you." As if summoned by their conversation, voices in the street below drew their attention to the window. Harrison had returned with a larger group of men, their animated discussion clearly audible in the evening quiet. "The woman is obviously unbalanced," Harrison's voice carried clearly through the open window. "Her obsessive counting and measuring suggest mental instability that could prove dangerous to the community's welfare." A voice Clara didn't recognize responded with skeptical tones. "Seems to me Fletcher's mighty pleased with her work. Says she improved his business considerably. Fletcher's easily impressed by anyone who can count past 10, Harrison replied dismissively. "I'm talking about serious concerns regarding her fitness for civilized society. Her own father's business failed due to financial irregularities, and her behavior suggests similar instability." Clara's hands clenched into fists as she listened to Harrison distort the truth about her father's business failure. He was deliberately creating a narrative that painted her as both mentally unstable and financially untrustworthy, a combination that could destroy any chance of establishing herself in Millbrook's business community. Mrs. Hayes' expression had grown thunderous as she listened to Harrison's accusations. "That man has gone too far. Spreading lies about your father's business is unconscionable." The conversation in the street continued for several more minutes, with Harrison systematically poisoning community opinion against Clara while positioning himself as a concerned citizen protecting Millbrook from a dangerous outsider. By the time the group dispersed, Clara realized that her situation had deteriorated from personal rejection to active persecution. "Mrs. Hayes," Clara said quietly, "perhaps it would be better for everyone if I left town tomorrow. I don't want to create problems for you or Mr. Mitchell." The older woman's response was immediate and emphatic. "Absolutely not. Running away would only confirm Harrison's accusations and encourage him to continue this despicable behavior. But if he succeeds in turning the community against me, then we'll prove him wrong through your actions rather than your words," Mrs. Hayes interrupted firmly. "I've seen bullies like Harrison before, dear. They count on their victims, retreating rather than fighting back. The best way to defeat his lies is to demonstrate the truth about your character and abilities." Clara wanted to believe Mrs. Hayes' confident words, but her experience with social persecution had taught her that truth often carried less weight than influential opinion in community disputes. Still, the alternative was returning to Baltimore, with even less money than she had possessed upon leaving, a prospect that offered no hope for genuine independence or acceptance. As night fell over Millbrook, Clara prepared for bed with the meticulous routine that had comforted her through countless difficulties. She arranged her few possessions according to logical principles, updated her financial calculations, and planned her approach to the following day's challenges. The numbers offered their usual solace, but they could not entirely quiet her fears about Harrison's campaign to destroy her reputation before she had a chance to establish herself. Tomorrow would bring her first visit to Samuel's accounting office and the beginning of what might be either a new life or another devastating failure. As Clara extinguished her lamp and settled into the unfamiliar bed, she found herself counting not sheep but possibilities, trying to calculate the odds of surviving William Harrison's determined efforts to drive her from Millbrook before she could prove her worth to the community that might yet become her home. The morning brought devastating news that shattered Clara's fragile sense of security in Millbrook. Mrs. Hayes knocked on her door before dawn, her usually composed demeanor replaced by urgent concern that set Clara's pulse racing even before she heard the words that would change everything. "Clara, dear, you need to see this," Mrs. Hayes said, holding a crumpled paper that bore the official seal of the Millbrook Town Council. "Someone slipped it under my door during the night." Clara's hands trembled as she unfolded the document and read its contents by lamplight. The formal language could not disguise the devastating message contained within its carefully worded paragraphs. The town council, responding to concerns raised by prominent citizens about her moral character and professional competence, was formally requesting that she vacate Millbrook within 72 hours for the protection of community welfare and business interests. "This can't be legal," Clara whispered, reading the notice a second time to ensure she had not misunderstood its implications. "They cannot simply order someone to leave town without proper legal proceedings." Mrs. Hayes' expression conveyed both anger and grim recognition of political realities. "Legal and enforceable are two different things in frontier communities, dear. If enough influential people want you gone, they can make life impossible regardless of what the law technically allows." Clara sank into the chair beside her writing desk, still clutching the expulsion notice while her mind raced through calculations of her impossible situation. 72 hours gave her until Friday, evening to somehow reverse a decision that represented the culmination of William Harrison's systematic campaign to destroy her reputation. With less than $3 remaining and no transportation arrangements, departing Millbrook would mean arriving somewhere else with essentially nothing. "There has to be something we can do," Clara said, though her voice lacked conviction. "Some way to challenge this decision or prove that Harrison's accusations are false." Mrs. Hayes sat on the edge of Clara's bed, her lined face showing the kind of determination that had sustained her through decades of frontier life. "There might be, but it would require taking significant risks. Are you prepared to fight for your place here, even if the battle becomes ugly?" The question forced Clara to confront fundamental choices about her future that she had been avoiding since Harrison's first public denunciation. She could accept defeat and leave Millbrook with what remained of her dignity, or she could stand and fight against accusations that threatened to follow her wherever she went. The mathematics of retreat offered limited prospects with minimal funds and damaged reputation. Her chances of successful establishment elsewhere were statistically negligible. "What kind of risks are you referring to?" Clara asked, though she suspected. She already knew the answer. Mrs. Hayes leaned forward with the conspiratorial manner of someone preparing to share dangerous knowledge. "Samuel and I have been investigating Harrison's business dealings, particularly his connections with banker Whitfield and certain members of the town council. We've discovered some irregularities that suggest his moral authority might not be as solid as he pretends." Clara's analytical mind immediately grasped the implications of Mrs. Hayes' words. If Harrison had engaged in questionable business practices, evidence of such activities could neutralize his accusations against her while simultaneously protecting her position in Millbrook. However, direct confrontation with powerful community figures carried enormous risks for everyone involved. "What sort of irregularities?" Clara asked carefully. "Missing funds from the church building fund, inflated prices on municipal supply contracts, and some very convenient timing regarding certain land purchases that preceded announced railroad developments." Mrs. Hayes counted off the infractions on her fingers. "Samuel's been quietly reviewing public records while you've been trying to establish your accounting practice." The scope of Harrison's apparent corruption exceeded Clara's expectations, though. She recognized that uncovering such activities and proving them publicly were entirely different challenges. Men with Harrison's influence often survived accusations that would destroy less powerful individuals, especially when those accusations came from people the community already viewed with suspicion. "Even if we can prove these irregularities, would anyone believe accusations coming from me?" Clara asked. "Harrison has successfully characterized me as mentally unstable and financially unreliable. My word against his would hardly constitute compelling evidence." Mrs. Hayes smiled with the satisfaction of someone who had anticipated this objection. "That's where Samuel's reputation becomes crucial. He's been the town's accountant for 5 years, and his integrity is unquestioned. If he presents evidence of financial improprieties, people will listen regardless of how that evidence was discovered." The plan that emerged from their conversation was both elegant and dangerous. Samuel would conduct a comprehensive audit of all municipal accounts and church funds under the pretense of updating the town's financial records for the coming year. Clara would assist with the detailed analysis required to identify patterns of fraud or embezzlement, using her systematic approach to trace discrepancies that less thorough examination might miss. "The town council meeting is scheduled for Thursday evening," Mrs. Hayes explained. "If we can present irrefutable evidence of Harrison's corruption, it might neutralize his influence and demonstrate that his accusations against you were motivated by fear of discovery rather than genuine concern for community welfare." Clara spent the remainder of that day working with Samuel to design an investigative approach that would reveal financial irregularities without alerting Harrison to their activities. They began with public records that required no special access, looking for patterns in municipal contracts and expenditures. that might indicate favoritism or inflated pricing. Samuel's office became a war room filled with ledgers, correspondence, and calculation sheets as they systematically analyzed 3 years of town financial records. Clara's talent for pattern recognition proved invaluable, as she identified subtle discrepancies that Samuel's more conventional approach had overlooked. "Look at these supply contracts," Clara said, pointing to a series of invoices from Harrison's ranch operation. "The prices charged to the municipality are consistently 20 to 30% higher than the rates he charges private customers for identical goods." Samuel examined the evidence with growing excitement. "And here's something even more interesting. All these contracts were approved by the same 3 council members who signed your expulsion notice." The web of corruption they uncovered exceeded their initial expectations. Harrison had systematically overcharged the municipality for supplies while splitting the excess profits with cooperative council members. Church building funds had been diverted through a series of loans that were never repaid. Most damaging of all, Harrison had used advanced knowledge of railroad development, plans to purchase land that subsequently increased dramatically in value. "This is enough to destroy him," Samuel said with satisfaction as they compiled their evidence into a comprehensive report. "No one can argue with mathematics when the numbers are this clear." Clara felt a mixture of relief and apprehension as they prepared for Thursday's town council meeting. Their evidence was compelling, but she knew that powerful men like Harrison rarely accepted defeat gracefully. His response to exposure might be even more vicious than his original campaign against her. Wednesday evening brought validation for their investigative efforts when Dr. Reeves approached Clara at Mrs. Hayes' boarding house with disturbing news about Harrison's increasingly desperate behavior. "He's been visiting prominent families all day," Dr. Reeves reported, "spreading stories about your supposed mental instability and claiming you've been gathering information to blackmail honest business owners." Clara's stomach tightened as she realized Harrison suspected their investigation and was attempting to discredit their evidence before it could be presented. "What specific accusations is he making?" "He's telling people that your obsessive record keeping is actually a cover for gathering compromising information about local businesses. He claims you've been secretly copying confidential documents and planning to use them for extortion purposes." The accusation was so outrageous that Clara initially dismissed it as obviously false. But Dr. Reeves' concerned expression suggested that some townspeople were taking Harrison's claims seriously. "Furthermore," Dr. Reeves continued, "he's brought in some men from his ranch operation to serve as witnesses to your allegedly threatening behavior. They're prepared to testify that you've made statements about destroying people who oppose you." Clara realized with growing horror that Harrison was constructing an elaborate framework of false testimony to neutralize whatever evidence they presented against him. By the time Thursday's meeting began, he would have convinced enough people of her supposed criminality that their financial evidence might be dismissed as fabricated revenge. "We need to adjust our strategy," Samuel said grimly after Dr. Reeves departed. "Harrison's not going to allow us to present evidence without challenging our motives and credibility." Mrs. Hayes, who had been listening to their conversation with increasing anger, rose from her chair with decisive energy. "Then we need allies who can vouch for Clara's character and confirm the validity of your financial analysis." The evening dissolved into frantic planning as they contacted every supporter they could identify in Millbrook's business community. Fletcher enthusiastically agreed to testify about Clara's organizational abilities and honest character. Tom Bradley promised to explain how her systematic approach had improved Consolidated Mining's record keeping. Even some of the women who had witnessed Harrison's public denunciation agreed to describe his arrogant behavior and questionable treatment of others. Thursday arrived with ominous gray clouds that seemed to mirror Clara's emotional state as she prepared for what would likely determine her future in Millbrook. She dressed in her most conservative clothing and arranged her evidence folders with meticulous care, knowing that her presentation would need to be flawless to overcome Harrison's preemptive character assassination. The town hall filled early. As word spread about the evening's confrontation between Harrison's influence and the newcomer he was determined to expel. Clara counted 47 people in attendance, including most of the town's business owners and several families whose opinions carried significant weight in community decisions. Harrison arrived with 6 supporters whose expensive clothes and confident bearing marked them as men accustomed to having their opinions respected without question. He positioned himself strategically near the front of the room where his presence would dominate proceedings, while his allies scattered throughout the audience to create an impression of widespread support. Samuel and Clara took seats near the back, their evidence carefully organized but their prospects uncertain, as they observed the political dynamics playing out before the meeting officially began. Several townspeople approached to offer quiet words of encouragement, but others pointedly avoided eye contact or moved away when they appeared. Council Chairman Morrison called the meeting to order with obvious reluctance, his expression suggesting he would prefer to be anywhere else than moderating a confrontation between 2 determined factions of his community. We're here tonight to address concerns that have been raised about Miss Clara Thompson's continued residence in Millbrook. Morrison began formally. Mr. Harrison has requested an opportunity to present evidence supporting the council's previous decision, after which Miss Thompson will be permitted to respond. Harrison rose with theatrical dignity and approached the front of the room like a prosecutor preparing to deliver a devastating summation. His opening words established the framework for character assassination disguised as community protection. Fellow citizens, I come before you tonight not from personal animosity, but from genuine concern for our town's welfare and prosperity. The evidence I will present demonstrates that Miss Thompson represents a clear and present danger to every business owner in this community. Clara forced herself to remain calm as Harrison systematically repeated his previous accusations, while adding new fabrications designed to paint her as a calculating predator who had come to Millbrook specifically to prey upon honest businesses. According to his testimony, her organizational work at Fletcher's store had been reconnaissance for future blackmail attempts. She used her position of trust to copy confidential customer information and business records, Harrison declared, producing what appeared to be official-looking documents. These sworn statements from reliable witnesses confirm that she made threatening remarks about destroying anyone who opposed her plans. The documents Harrison presented were obviously fabricated, but they bore impressive seals and signatures. That gave them an appearance of legitimacy that might convince people unfamiliar with proper legal procedures. Clara watched with growing dismay as several audience members nodded approvingly at Harrison's evidence. Samuel's turn to respond came after Harrison had spent 30 minutes constructing his case for Clara's expulsion. The quiet accountant approached the front of the room with none of Harrison's theatrical flair, but his reputation for honesty and accuracy gave his words immediate credibility. Ladies and gentlemen, I've had the privilege of working closely with Miss Thompson for the past week, and I can state categorically that Mr. Harrison's accusations are false. Rather than threatening local businesses, she has improved them through systematic organization and careful analysis. Samuel's presentation of their financial evidence was methodical and devastating. He displayed clear documentation of Harrison's overcharging schemes, his misappropriation of church funds, and his use of insider information for personal profit. Each accusation was supported by mathematical calculations that were impossible to dispute. These figures show that Mr. Harrison has systematically defrauded the municipality of over $800 during the past 18 months, Samuel concluded. His accusations against Miss Thompson appear to be motivated by fear that her accounting expertise would expose his corrupt practices. The audience's reaction to Samuel's evidence was immediate and dramatic. Several council members who had supported Harrison's position began examining the financial documents with obvious concern, while business owners who had been overcharged demanded explanations for the discrepancies. Harrison's response revealed the desperation of a cornered man, whose carefully constructed reputation was collapsing around him. He attacked Samuel's evidence as fabricated revenge, questioned Clara's mental stability, and demanded that the council ignore obvious forgeries created by a disturbed woman and her deluded accomplice. These so-called financial records have been manipulated by someone whose obsessive mental condition makes her incapable of accurate analysis, Harrison shouted, his composure finally cracking under pressure. Samuel Mitchell has been deceived by a woman whose unnatural compulsions have obviously affected his judgment. Clara realized that the moment had come for her to speak on her own behalf, regardless of her fear about public speaking and community rejection. She rose from her seat and walked to the front of the room with measured steps, her heart pounding but her resolve firm. "Mr. Harrison is correct about one thing," Clara began, her voice steady despite her nervousness. "I do have what he calls unnatural compulsions. I count everything, measure distances obsessively, and organize information according to mathematical principles that most people find excessive." The audience listened with surprised attention as Clara openly acknowledged the very characteristics Harrison had used to attack her credibility. Several people exchanged confused glances, uncertain whether she was confirming or denying his accusations. However, Clara continued with growing confidence. "These same compulsions allowed me to identify the systematic fraud that Mr. Harrison has been perpetrating against this community. My obsessive attention to detail revealed patterns that normal analysis would have missed." Clara proceeded to explain her analytical methods in terms that demonstrated both her mathematical expertise and her genuine commitment to accuracy and honesty. She described how her systematic approach to record-keeping had improved businesses throughout Millbrook, and how that same approach had uncovered the financial irregularities that Harrison was desperate to conceal. "I am different from most people," Clara concluded, looking directly at Harrison. "But my differences have served this community well, while Mr. Harrison's apparent normalcy has masked corruption that has cost you hundreds of dollars and betrayed your trust." The vote that followed was closer than Clara had hoped, but decisive. Enough to validate their evidence and establish her right to remain in Millbrook. Harrison's support crumbled as the mathematical proof of his corruption convinced even former allies that their loyalty had been misplaced. Council Chairman Morrison announced the results with obvious relief that the community crisis had been resolved without permanent damage to Millbrook's social fabric. "The council finds no grounds for Miss Thompson's expulsion and commends her public service in exposing financial irregularities that require immediate investigation." Harrison left the meeting in furious defeat, his political influence destroyed and his business relationships in ruins. Several of his former supporters approached Clara with apologies and expressions of support, while others simply departed in embarrassed silence. The weeks that followed brought transformation beyond Clara's most optimistic calculations. Her partnership with Samuel flourished as businesses throughout the region sought their systematic approach to financial management. The organizational methods she had developed proved valuable for mining operations, ranches, and retail establishments struggling with the complexities of frontier commerce. More importantly, Clara discovered that Millbrook contained more people willing to appreciate her differences than to condemn them. Her mathematical nature, once a source of shame and rejection, became the foundation for professional respect and personal acceptance that she had never experienced. Samuel's feelings toward her evolved from professional admiration to personal affection with the same methodical progression that characterized their business partnership. Their wedding the following spring was celebrated by a community that had learned to value systematic thinking and honest accounting over social conformity and political influence. Clara Thompson became Clara Mitchell in a ceremony that reflected both traditional values and progressive acceptance of women's professional capabilities. The church service was followed by a reception where business owners competed to describe how her organizational innovations had improved their operations and increased their profits. Standing beside Samuel as they greeted their wedding guests, Clara reflected on the mathematical precision with which her life had changed course in Millbrook. Every rejection had led to opportunities, every challenge had revealed strengths, and every systematic calculation had pointed toward this moment of complete acceptance and genuine love. Mrs. Hayes approached with tears of satisfaction and a wedding gift that perfectly captured Clara's transformation from rejected mail-order bride to respected community member. The gift was a brass nameplate reading Mitchell & Mitchell, Certified Public Accountants, that would grace their expanded office serving clients throughout Colorado Territory. "I always knew the numbers would add up correctly in the end," Mrs. Hayes said with emotional warmth. "It just took time for the right person to appreciate the equation." Clara smiled as she accepted the nameplate, knowing that her story had become the kind of legend that would inspire other unconventional women seeking acceptance in frontier communities where practical skills mattered more than social expectations. Her mathematical compulsions had evolved from personal shame to professional triumph, proving that systematic thinking could overcome prejudice when supported by courage and determination. The evening celebration continued with music and dancing that Clara approached with the same methodical precision she applied to accounting procedures. She counted dance steps, measured musical rhythms, and calculated the optimal positioning for maximum enjoyment while maintaining proper social decorum. Samuel watched his new wife's systematic approach to celebration with amused affection, understanding that her mathematical nature was integral to the intelligence and integrity that had made their partnership both personally and professionally successful. Their first dance was a waltz that Clara performed with characteristic precision, each step perfectly timed and each turn executed with mathematical accuracy. As the night progressed and their guests departed with congratulations and promises of continued business relationships, Clara and Samuel stood together outside their office building, looking toward a future that contained infinite possibilities for growth and achievement. The brass nameplate gleamed in the moonlight, reflecting their shared commitment to systematic excellence and honest service. "Any regrets about choosing the peculiar woman over the conventional alternatives?" Clara asked with playful reference to their unconventional courtship. Samuel's response captured the mathematical certainty that had guided their relationship from its uncertain beginnings to this moment of complete partnership. When you find the perfect solution to a complex equation, you don't question the methods that led you to the answer. Clara smiled as she contemplated their transformed circumstances, knowing that their love story would become part of Millbrook's growing legend as a community where differences were celebrated rather than condemned, where systematic thinking was valued over social conformity, and where two mathematical minds had found the perfect balance that validated both their professional aspirations and their personal dreams. 2 years after the dramatic town council meeting that had transformed her from unwanted outsider to respected community member, Clara Mitchell stood in the expanded offices of Mitchell & Mitchell Certified Public Accountants, surveying the remarkable changes that systematic thinking and determined perseverance had wrought in both her personal circumstances and the broader Millbrook business community. The modest single room that had once housed Samuel's struggling practice had grown into a 3-room operation that employed 2 additional clerks and served clients throughout Colorado Territory. The morning sun streamed through windows that now bore the gold-leafed inscription, Mitchell & Mitchell, Est, 1888, while illuminating filing cabinets that contained the financial records of 37 active business accounts. Clara moved through the organized space with practiced efficiency, her movements reflecting the confidence that came from professional success and personal fulfillment that had seemed impossible during those desperate first days in Millbrook. Her daily routine began with systematic review of pending projects and calculations that would guide the day's priorities. The Consolidated Mining Company's quarterly report required final verification before submission to Denver investors. 3. New retail establishments needed initial organizational consultations. The territorial government had requested proposals for standardizing municipal accounting procedures across 12 frontier towns. Each project represented both financial opportunity and professional validation that her mathematical approach to business management had genuine value beyond Millbrook's boundaries. Samuel emerged from his private office carrying correspondence that bore the seal of the Colorado Territorial Administration, his expression conveying excitement that immediately captured Clara's attention. After 2 years of marriage and professional partnership, she had learned to read the subtle indicators that preceded significant announcements. "Clara, we've received a response to our proposal for the Territorial Accounting Standardization Project," Samuel said, extending the official letter with obvious satisfaction. "They've accepted our recommendations and are offering us a contract that would make us the official consultants for municipal financial systems throughout the entire territory." Clara accepted the letter with hands that trembled slightly as she comprehended the magnitude of the opportunity being presented. The territorial contract would establish their reputation far beyond the local region, while providing financial security that exceeded her most optimistic projections. More importantly, it represented official recognition that her systematic approach to record keeping could benefit entire communities rather than individual businesses. The compensation they're offering would allow us to establish branch offices in Denver and Colorado Springs, Clara observed, automatically calculating the implications of territorial expansion. "We could train other accountants in our methods and create a network of systematically managed municipal operations." Samuel's enthusiasm matched her own as they discussed the transformative potential of the territorial contract. Their organizational innovations had already revolutionized business practices in Millbrook and surrounding communities, but official government endorsement would create opportunities to influence financial management throughout the developing West. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of their first appointment of the day, a delegation of businesswomen from Denver who had traveled specifically to consult with Clara about establishing systematic accounting procedures for female-owned enterprises. The group included 3 dress shop owners, a boarding house operator, and a woman who managed investment properties for wealthy clients unable to oversee their holdings personally. "Mrs. Mitchell," said their spokeswoman, a elegantly dressed woman named Margaret Pemberton, who owned Denver's most successful millinery shop. "We've heard remarkable things about your organizational methods and their effectiveness in improving business profitability. We're hoping you might consider expanding your services to include enterprises owned and operated by women." Clara felt a surge of pride as she realized that her professional reputation had spread beyond traditional male-dominated business circles to inspire other women seeking to establish legitimate commercial enterprises. The request represented validation of her belief that systematic thinking could overcome gender-based prejudices in the business world. "I'd be delighted to discuss how our methods might benefit your operations," Clara replied, gesturing toward the conference table that had become the centerpiece of their expanded office space. Systematic organization is equally effective regardless of business ownership or management structure. The consultation that followed revealed both the challenges facing female entrepreneurs and the remarkable ingenuity they had developed to overcome obstacles created by social prejudice and limited access to traditional business resources. Margaret Pemberton's millinery operation generated substantial profits but lacked the systematic record-keeping necessary to secure bank loans for expansion. The boarding house operator had developed innovative customer service procedures but needed help organizing her financial documentation to demonstrate the stability required for real estate investments. Clara's analysis of their various enterprises identified common problems that could be addressed through standardized organizational procedures. adapted to the specific challenges facing women in business. Banks typically demanded more extensive documentation from female borrowers, making systematic record-keeping even more crucial for women than for their male counterparts. Social prejudices often prevented women from accessing professional services, creating demand for specialized consulting that understood both business requirements and gender-related obstacles. Mrs. Mitchell, Margaret Pemberton said as their consultation concluded, "Would you consider establishing a specialized division of your practice dedicated to serving female-owned businesses? There are dozens of women throughout Colorado Territory who could benefit from your expertise." The proposal aligned perfectly with Clara's growing conviction that her mathematical abilities could serve broader social purposes beyond individual profit. Helping other women achieve business success would extend the impact of her systematic thinking while creating professional opportunities for female entrepreneurs who faced similar prejudices to those she had encountered. Samuel's immediate endorsement of the Women's Business Division reflected both his support for Clara's professional aspirations and his recognition of the significant market opportunity it represented. "We could establish separate consultation schedules specifically for female-owned enterprises while developing specialized organizational systems that address the unique challenges they face." Planning for the territorial contract and the women's business division consumed the remainder of the morning as Clara and Samuel worked together to design expansion strategies that would maintain their commitment to systematic excellence while accommodating dramatically increased demand for their services. The mathematical calculations involved in projecting staff requirements, office space needs, and financial projections provided Clara with the familiar comfort of logical problem-solving applied to professional growth. Their planning session was interrupted by the unexpected arrival of William Harrison, whose appearance at their office door created immediate tension that transported Clara back to the desperate uncertainty of her first days in Millbrook. Harrison had aged considerably during the 2 years since his public disgrace, his once polished appearance now showing signs of financial strain and social isolation that reflected the consequences of his corrupt business practices. "Mr. Mitchell." "Mrs. Mitchell," Harrison said with forced politeness that poorly concealed his obvious discomfort. "I hope I might speak with you briefly about a business matter." Clara exchanged glances with Samuel, both recognizing the irony of Harrison seeking assistance from the woman he had tried so desperately to destroy. His current circumstances represented a complete reversal of their previous power dynamics, with Clara now holding the professional authority and community respect that Harrison had once wielded so arrogantly. "Please, have a seat," Samuel said, with professional courtesy that transcended their personal history. "How can we assist you?" Harrison's request revealed the depth of his financial desperation and the thoroughness of his fall from community prominence. His remaining business interests were failing due to poor record-keeping and questionable management decisions. Creditors were demanding accurate financial statements that he lacked the expertise to prepare. Most damaging of all, his reputation. For corruption had made it impossible to secure professional accounting services from any established firm willing to associate with his tainted name. "I know I have no right to ask for your help after what I did," Harrison said, his pride obviously struggling with practical necessity. "But you're the only accountants in the territory with the expertise to organize the kind of comprehensive financial analysis my creditors are demanding." Clara studied Harrison's haggard appearance while calculating the professional and personal implications of accepting his request for assistance. Her systematic nature demanded that business decisions be based on objective criteria rather than emotional reactions, but she could not ignore the poetic justice of Harrison seeking salvation from the woman he had characterized as mentally unstable and professionally incompetent. "Mr. Harrison," Clara said carefully, "our services are available to any legitimate business willing to pay our standard rates and comply with our professional standards. However, I should mention that our approach to financial analysis is quite thorough, and systematic. The subtle emphasis on systematic reminded Harrison of his previous accusations about her obsessive attention to detail, but his desperate circumstances left him no choice but to accept whatever conditions she might impose. His agreement to their terms represented complete capitulation to the mathematical precision he had once condemned as evidence of mental instability. Samuel's professional handling of Harrison's account demonstrated the ethical standards that had made their practice successful while providing Clara with satisfaction that transcended mere revenge. They applied the same systematic analysis to Harrison's failing enterprises that they used for all clients, identifying both the management errors that had created his current difficulties and the organizational changes necessary for potential recovery. The comprehensive audit of Harrison's business records revealed financial chaos that exceeded even Clara's expectations. Years of poor record-keeping, inflated expense reports, and inadequate inventory controls had created a maze of inconsistencies that required weeks of detailed analysis to untangle. Harrison's creditors had legitimate concerns about his ability to manage business affairs competently. "Mr. Harrison," Clara said as they completed their analysis, "our review indicates that your business difficulties stem primarily from inadequate, systematic organization rather than fundamental economic problems. Your ranch operations remain profitable, but poor record-keeping has created artificial cash flow crises that proper management could easily resolve." The organizational plan they developed for Harrison's recovery required him to implement exactly the kind of systematic procedures he had once characterized as evidence of mental instability. Daily inventory records, weekly financial summaries, and monthly reconciliation procedures would provide the accurate information necessary for sound business decisions. Harrison's acceptance of their recommendations represented personal vindication. For Clara, that was more satisfying than any revenge could have been. The man who had publicly condemned her mathematical compulsions was now dependent upon those same systematic methods for his professional survival. The months that followed brought accelerated growth for Mitchell and Mitchell as word of their territorial contract attracted clients from throughout Colorado and surrounding territories. Clara's women's business division flourished as female entrepreneurs discovered that systematic organization could overcome many of the obstacles created by social prejudice and limited access to traditional business resources. The success of their expanded practice required Clara to travel frequently throughout the territory, providing consultation services and training local accountants in their systematic methods. These journeys took her to mining camps in the mountains, agricultural communities on the eastern plains, and growing cities where territorial expansion was creating unprecedented opportunities for systematic business development. During one such trip to Denver, Clara encountered a familiar face that reminded her of the journey that had brought her to Colorado and the transformation that systematic thinking had wrought in her circumstances. The woman approaching her hotel was unmistakably another mail-order bride, her nervous demeanor and careful attention to her appearance marking her as someone hoping to make a favorable impression on a prospective husband. "Excuse me," the young woman said hesitantly. "Might you be Mrs. Clara Mitchell? I've heard about your accounting business and was hoping I might speak with you briefly." Clara introduced herself and learned that the woman, Sarah Bennett, had traveled from Ohio to marry a Denver businessman who had subsequently rejected her for reasons that sounded disturbingly familiar. Sarah's mathematical education and systematic approach to household management had been characterized as unseemly for a proper wife, leaving her stranded with minimal resources and uncertain prospects. "Mrs. Mitchell," Sarah said with desperate hope, "I've heard that you also came west as a mail-order bride and somehow established a successful business. Could you possibly advise me about how I might do the same?" Clara's response drew upon both her professional expertise and her personal understanding of the challenges facing unconventional women in frontier society. She explained how systematic thinking could be transformed from social liability into business asset, how mathematical abilities could create professional opportunities that transcended traditional gender roles, and how personal differences could become sources of strength rather than shame. Miss Bennett, Clara concluded, your mathematical abilities and systematic nature are valuable assets that the right employer would appreciate greatly. The key is finding opportunities where those abilities are recognized as professional qualifications rather than personal eccentricities. The consultation with Sarah Bennett evolved into Clara's first formal mentoring relationship as she helped a younger woman develop organizational skills into marketable professional services. Sarah's expertise in household management systems proved valuable for Denver's growing population of wealthy families who needed systematic approaches to managing complex domestic operations. Within 6 months, Sarah had established her own consulting practice specializing in household organization and domestic efficiency, serving clients who appreciated systematic approaches to managing large households, social entertaining, and family financial planning. Her success represented proof that Clara's transformation from rejected mail-order bride to successful businesswoman could be replicated by other women with similar determination and systematic thinking abilities. The Territorial Accounting Standardization project reached completion after 18 months of intensive work that established Mitchell as the premier consulting firm for municipal financial systems throughout Colorado Territory. Their systematic methods became the official standard for 12 frontier towns, creating a network of properly organized municipal operations that facilitated economic development and attracted investment capital. Clara's role in developing territorial accounting standards earned recognition from the Colorado Territorial Legislature, which passed a resolution commending her contributions to systematic government financial management. The official recognition represented acknowledgement that her mathematical compulsions had become valuable public service that benefited entire communities. Samuel's pride in Clara's achievements was evident during the legislative ceremony where territorial officials praised her innovative approaches to complex organizational challenges. The woman who had arrived in Millbrook as an unwanted mail-order bride was now being honored by the territorial government for professional contributions that extended far beyond individual business success. The ceremony was attended by representatives from throughout Colorado Territory, including several women who had benefited from Clara's mentoring and consulting services. Sarah Bennett traveled from Denver with 3 other female entrepreneurs who credited Clara's systematic methods with enabling their business success. Mrs. Mitchell, said Territorial Governor Davis during his presentation remarks, your contributions to systematic financial management have improved the efficiency and reliability of municipal operations throughout Colorado Territory. Your innovative methods represent the kind of practical intelligence that builds prosperous communities. Clara's acceptance speech emphasized the broader implications of systematic thinking for frontier development and social progress. She described how mathematical precision could overcome prejudice, how organizational excellence could create opportunities for unconventional individuals, and how systematic approaches to complex problems could benefit entire communities. Systematic thinking is not a peculiarity to be ashamed of, but a valuable tool for solving the complex challenges facing our growing territory, Clara told the assembled officials and citizens. When we celebrate precision over prejudice and organization over convention, we create communities where all citizens can contribute their unique abilities to our collective prosperity. The years that followed brought continued expansion for Mitchell & Mitchell as their reputation spread throughout the Western Territories. Clara's systematic methods became the foundation for municipal accounting systems in Montana, Wyoming, and New Mexico, while her women's business division inspired similar consulting practices in major cities throughout the region. Samuel and Clara's personal relationship deepened alongside their professional partnership, as shared success reinforced their mutual respect and appreciation for each other's contributions to their remarkable transformation from struggling frontier accountants to territorial business leaders. Their marriage became a model for professional partnerships that valued systematic collaboration over traditional gender roles. The 10th anniversary of Clara's arrival in Millbrook was celebrated with a community festival that honored both her personal journey and her contributions to the town's economic development. The celebration included speeches from business owners whose operations had been transformed by her organizational methods, presentations from women entrepreneurs who had followed her example, and recognition from territorial officials who credited her systematic approaches with improving government efficiency. Mrs. Hayes, now in her 70s but still managing her boarding house with characteristic efficiency, served as the ceremony's keynote speaker. Her remarks captured the significance of Clara's transformation from rejected outsider to respected community leader. 10 years ago, a young woman stepped off the train in Millbrook carrying nothing but mathematical abilities that others saw as peculiarities. Mrs. Hayes told the assembled crowd, "Today, those same abilities have transformed not just our community, but our entire understanding of what systematic thinking can accomplish when it's supported by courage and determination." Clara's response to the community celebration emphasized her gratitude for the acceptance and opportunities that Millbrook had ultimately provided, while acknowledging the broader lessons her experience offered for other communities struggling with prejudice and social convention. "This town taught me that differences should be celebrated rather than condemned, that systematic thinking can overcome social obstacles, and that communities prosper when they value practical contributions over social conformity," Clara said. "My mathematical compulsions brought me shame in other places, but here they became the foundation for professional success and personal fulfillment." The celebration concluded with the dedication of a permanent monument recognizing Clara's contributions to territorial development and systematic business management. The bronze plaque described her transformation from mail-order bride to territorial business leader, while emphasizing the broader significance of her achievement for women's professional advancement. As Clara stood beside the monument with Samuel and their assembled friends and colleagues, she reflected on the mathematical precision with which her life had evolved from desperation to triumph. Every systematic calculation had pointed toward this moment of complete acceptance and recognition, proving that her compulsive attention to detail had been a strength disguised as weakness. The evening concluded with dancing and celebration that Clara approached with the same methodical precision she applied to all activities, her systematic nature now celebrated rather than condemned by a community that had learned to appreciate the value of organized thinking and careful planning. Samuel watched his wife's characteristic approach to social celebration with affection that had deepened through years of shared professional and personal challenges. Their partnership had demonstrated that systematic thinking and emotional compatibility could create relationships stronger than those based on conventional social expectations. "Any final calculations about whether this all added up correctly?" Samuel asked as they walked home through Millbrook's quiet streets. Clara smiled as she contemplated their extraordinary journey from desperate circumstances to territorial recognition, knowing that her story had become part of the growing legend of the American West, where individual determination and systematic thinking could overcome social prejudice and create unprecedented opportunities for personal and professional achievement. When the equation includes courage, determination, and systematic thinking, Clara replied, "The solution is always positive, even when the initial variables seem impossibly challenging." Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of the evening train, its whistle echoing across the prairie with the same haunting note that had announced Clara's arrival 10 years earlier. But now the sound represented opportunity rather than desperation, connection rather than isolation, and the endless possibilities that awaited those brave enough to apply systematic thinking to the challenges of frontier life. 25 years, had transformed the dusty frontier town of Millbrook into a thriving commercial center that bore little resemblance to the modest settlement where Clara Thompson had first stepped off the train as an unwanted mail-order bride. The wooden sidewalks had been replaced with brick pathways that led past three-story buildings housing banks, law offices, and sophisticated retail, establishments that would have seemed impossible in the rough mining town of 1888. Clara Mitchell stood at the window of the prestigious Mitchell and Associates building that now dominated the corner of Main and Railroad Streets, its 4 floors housing the largest accounting firm between Denver and San Francisco. Her silver hair was arranged in the elegant style befitting a woman whose professional achievements had earned recognition throughout the American West, while her bearing reflected the confidence that came from decades of systematic success built upon the mathematical precision that had once made her unmarriageable. The morning routine that had sustained Clara through 25 years of professional growth began with review of correspondence from clients across 12 states and territories. Letters requesting consultation services arrived daily from municipal governments seeking systematic reform, mining companies requiring comprehensive financial analysis, and women entrepreneurs hoping to replicate the organizational methods that had made Mitchell and Associates synonymous with excellence in business management. Her private office contained testimonials from hundreds of businesses whose operations had been transformed through systematic organization, framed certificates from territorial and state governments recognizing her contributions to efficient administration, and photographs documenting the growth of Millbrook from frontier settlement to prosperous commercial center. Each artifact represented mathematical validation that her compulsive attention to detail had created value extending far beyond personal success. Samuel entered carrying the morning edition of the Denver Post, his expression conveying the mixture of pride and amazement that still characterized his response to public recognition of Clara's achievements. Despite 25 years of marriage and professional partnership, he remained genuinely impressed by the scope of influence their systematic methods had achieved throughout the developing West. The editorial board has officially endorsed your nomination for the Colorado Business Hall of Fame, Samuel announced, displaying the newspaper's front-page feature story about Clara's career. They're calling you the most influential business consultant in territorial history. Clara accepted the newspaper with hands that showed the elegant aging of someone whose professional accomplishments had earned both financial security and social respect. The Hall of Fame nomination represented acknowledgement from the state's most prestigious business organization that her mathematical compulsions had evolved into contributions worthy of permanent historical recognition. The feature article traced Clara's remarkable journey from rejected mail-order bride to territorial business leader, emphasizing how her systematic approach to organizational challenges had influenced accounting practices throughout the American West. The writer described her as a pioneering example of how individual determination could overcome social prejudice while creating unprecedented opportunities for professional advancement. Mrs. Mitchell's systematic methods revolutionized business practices throughout Colorado Territory and beyond, the article concluded. Her transformation from unwanted outsider to respected leader demonstrates the potential for individual excellence to overcome social obstacles and create lasting contributions to community prosperity. Clara's reflection on the newspaper's praise was interrupted by the arrival of her assistant with the morning's appointment schedule, which included consultation requests from 3 state governments, a railroad company planning transcontinental expansion, and a delegation of women entrepreneurs from California seeking advice about establishing systematic business practices on the Pacific Coast. The diversity of clients seeking her expertise reflected the remarkable expansion of systematic thinking from frontier survival tool to sophisticated business methodology. Clara's organizational innovations had influenced operations ranging from mining claims in Montana to agricultural cooperatives in Nebraska. demonstrating that mathematical precision could improve efficiency across all sectors of the developing American economy. Her first appointment involved a comprehensive review of financial systems for the Colorado state government, which had retained Mitchell and Associates to design accounting procedures for the territory's anticipated statehood. The project represented culmination of Clara's transformation from local bookkeeper to consultant, whose systematic methods would influence governmental operations for generations. Governor Patterson arrived with a delegation of territorial officials whose respectful attention demonstrated how thoroughly Clara's professional reputation had overcome the social prejudices that had once threatened her survival in Millbrook. The men who might have dismissed her mathematical compulsions as feminine eccentricity now sought her expertise as essential for effective governmental administration. "Mrs. Mitchell," Governor Patterson began, "the federal government has indicated that systematic financial procedures will be required for statehood approval. Your reputation for organizational excellence makes you the obvious choice for designing Colorado's official accounting systems." The governmental contract represented both professional triumph and historical significance that exceeded Clara's most optimistic projections from those desperate early days in Millbrook. Her systematic methods would become the foundation for Colorado's state government, ensuring that her mathematical precision would influence public administration long after her retirement. Clara's response emphasized both the technical requirements of governmental accounting and the broader implications of systematic thinking for democratic administration. Effective government requires the same organizational principles that improve business efficiency: mathematical accuracy, systematic record-keeping, and transparent procedures create accountability that serves citizen interests. The consultation session revealed the complexity of designing financial systems for a state government while maintaining the systematic principles that had made Clara's business methods successful. Federal requirements, constitutional mandates, and practical administrative needs had to be balanced through organizational frameworks that could accommodate both current operations and future growth. Samuel's participation in the governmental project demonstrated how their professional partnership had evolved to encompass challenges that neither could have addressed individually. His experience with large-scale operations complemented Clara's systematic innovations, creating consulting capabilities that exceeded the expertise available from any competing firm. The afternoon brought visitors whose presence reminded Clara of the personal journey that had preceded her professional achievements. Sarah Bennett arrived from Denver with 3 other women whose successful businesses had been built upon systematic methods learned through Clara's mentoring program. Sarah had transformed from desperate mail-order bride to proprietor of Denver's most successful domestic management consulting firm, serving wealthy families throughout Colorado and neighboring territories. Her achievement represented proof that Clara's transformation could be replicated by other women with similar determination and systematic thinking abilities. "Mrs. Mitchell," Sarah said during their reunion, "I wanted you to know that the Colorado Women's Business Association has voted to establish an annual award recognizing systematic innovation in female entrepreneurship. They're calling it the Clara Mitchell Award for Excellence in Business Organization." The announcement that her name would be permanently associated with women's business achievement created emotional resonance that transcended mere professional recognition. Clara had hoped that her success might inspire other unconventional women, but she had not anticipated that her systematic methods would become the foundation for ongoing support of female entrepreneurship. The women's discussion revealed how extensively Clara's influence had spread throughout the region's business community. Systematic organization had become the standard approach for female-owned enterprises, while her mentoring methods had created networks of successful women entrepreneurs who continued supporting others facing similar challenges. "Your example showed us that mathematical ability should be celebrated rather than hidden," explained Margaret Foster, who had established Wyoming Territory's first female-owned mining supply company. When women embrace systematic thinking, instead of apologizing for it, we create businesses that outperform traditional male-dominated operations. Evening brought the monthly gathering of Millbrook's business community, where Clara's presence was now treated with the respect accorded to someone whose contributions had transformed the entire region's economic development. The meeting was held in the community center that bore her name, a substantial building funded through donations from businesses whose success had been enabled by systematic organizational methods. Mayor Harrison introduced Clara with remarks that emphasized both her personal achievement and its broader significance for community development. Ironically, the mayor shared a surname with William Harrison, though this younger man represented a new generation that valued systematic excellence over social prejudice. Mrs. Mitchell's systematic methods didn't just transform individual businesses. Mayor Harrison told the assembled entrepreneurs, they created a culture of organizational excellence that attracted investment, improved efficiency, and established Millbrook as the most prosperous community in Colorado Territory. Clara's address to the business gathering focused on the lessons her 25-year journey offered for future development and continued innovation. She emphasized how systematic thinking could address emerging challenges while maintaining the principles that had enabled Millbrook's transformation from frontier settlement to commercial center. The systematic methods that improved our early businesses can be adapted to address more sophisticated challenges, Clara explained. Mathematical precision remains as valuable for complex operations as it was for simple inventory management. The key is maintaining systematic approaches while embracing innovation. The evening concluded with presentation of a specially commissioned portrait that would hang permanently in the community center, depicting Clara at her desk surrounded by the ledgers and calculation devices that had become symbols of systematic business management. The portrait captured both her professional achievement and the mathematical precision that had transformed apparent weakness into extraordinary strength. Samuel's remarks during the portrait presentation emphasized how Clara's systematic nature had influenced not just business practices but social attitudes toward unconventional individuals, whose differences could become valuable contributions to community prosperity. 25 years ago, Millbrook almost lost the person who would become our most valuable citizen, Samuel observed. Clara's experience taught us that communities prosper when they celebrate differences rather than condemn them, when they value practical contributions over social conformity. As the celebration concluded, and Clara prepared for the carriage ride home, through streets that bore little resemblance to the dusty trails she had once walked in desperation, she reflected on the mathematical precision with which her life had evolved from rejection to recognition. Every systematic calculation had pointed toward this moment of complete vindication and historical significance. The final image that would remain with those who knew Clara's story was of a woman whose mathematical compulsions had transformed from source of shame into foundation of unprecedented achievement. Her counting habits, measuring obsessions, and systematic organization had become the tools through which individual determination had overcome social prejudice while creating lasting contributions to regional development. The evening train's whistle echoed across the prosperous town that Clara's systematic methods had helped create, its sound representing the endless possibilities that awaited those brave enough to embrace their differences and apply systematic thinking to the challenges of American frontier life. Her transformation from unwanted mail-order bride to territorial business leader had become part of the growing legend of the American West, where individual excellence could overcome any obstacle when supported by mathematical precision and unwavering determination. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.